The Alpha King's Dragon Rider. "Let it burn them," the Alpha King whispered, his voice a jagged edge against the castle's silent stone. "If they are arrogant enough to believe they can break a god, let them become nothing but its ash." Whitaker Stormwood stared down into the blackened crater of the royal courtyard. Below, the ancient dragon, Verithrax, roared a sound that shattered the courage of men. Another elite rider had fallen. Another failure. The beast was untamable, a curse upon his crown. Yet in the shadows of the scullery, a broken maid with scarred hands listened to the beast's cries, hearing not a monster's rage, but an agony she herself knew all too well. The kingdom of Stormwood was a realm built on the bones of conquered beasts. Yet it was currently being held hostage by one. High above the soot-stained parapets of the Obsidian Keep, the sky bled into shades of bruised purple and violent crimson. It was the hour of the dragon, the time when Verithrax, the great obsidian terror of the old world, paced the confines of the lower pits. His roars hook the very foundations of the castle, sending fine trails of ancient dust cascading from the high ceilings. Alpha King Whitaker Stormwood stood on his balcony, the cool evening wind tearing at his dark cloak. He was a man carved from the harsh realities of leadership, broad-shouldered with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a jaw set in perpetual tension. For centuries, the Stormwood line had maintained its dominance through their symbiotic bond with the ancient dragons. But Verithrax was different. Brought down from the jagged peaks of the northern crags, the beast was wild, grieving, and entirely driven by a chaotic fury. It had been 3 months since the dragon's capture, and in that time, 7 of the realm's most decorated riders had attempted to claim the beast. All 7 had been returned to their families in small metallic urns. "My king," a voice murmured from the shadows of the study. Enrique Solis, the king's most trusted advisor, stepped into the dim light. He was an older man, his face lined with the stress of navigating the treacherous political waters of the kingdom. "Lord Diego Zamora has sent another missive. He questions your ability to control the beast. He whispers to the other lords that an alpha who cannot tame his own dragon is no alpha at all." Whitaker's hands tightened on the stone balustrade until his knuckles turned white. "Diego Zamora is a vulture waiting for a corpse. He knows that without a bonded dragon, my claim to the throne is vulnerable. The beast is a symbol of our power. If it remains feral, the other packs will rebel." "There is another rider arriving tomorrow," Enrique offered gently. "Cesar Dominguez. He is said to be the finest in the Southern Territories. Arrogant, yes, but highly skilled." "Skill means nothing to a creature of pure fire," Whitaker sighed, turning away from the balcony. "But we have no choice. Prepare the arena for tomorrow." Deep beneath the royal chambers, in the damp, suffocating heat of the scullery, the world of politics and power felt a million miles away. Here the air was thick with the smell of sweat, boiling water, and despair. Imagigen Ashridge knelt on the hard flagstones, her rough, scarred hands vigorously scrubbing a stubborn stain from the floor. Imagigen was a ghost in her own life. Once she had been a girl with dreams, the daughter of a prominent blacksmith in a border village, but the dragon wars had taken everything from her. A rogue fire drake had decimated her home, leaving her orphaned and bearing terrible burn scars that traced up her left arm and the side of her neck. She had been sold into servitude to pay her family's remaining debts, eventually ending up in the royal keep, where she was treated as little more than a scuff mark on the floor. "Faster, you useless girl," snapped Sylvia Chavez, the head maid. Sylvia was a woman whose heart was as cold and hard as the castle walls. She wielded her authority over the servants with sadistic pleasure. She kicked the side of Imagigen's wooden bucket, sending soapy water sloshing over Imagigen's threadbare dress. "The king is hosting the southern lords tomorrow. The grand halls must shine, or I'll have you whipped and thrown into the lower dungeons." "Yes, Madam Sylvia," Imagigen whispered, keeping her head bowed. She had learned long ago that invisibility was her best defense. "Look at her, always moping." Another maid. Though her tone lacked Sylvia's venom, Estella was a pragmatist who survived by aligning herself with power. Imagigen ignored them, dipping her brush back into the water. But as another tremor rocked the castle, accompanied by a distant, mournful roar from the dragon pit, Imagigen paused. The other maids shivered in terror, but she felt a strange cold pull in her chest. While the rest of the kingdom heard a monster threatening to tear the world apart, Imagigen heard something else entirely. She heard a creature that had been stripped of its home, chained in the dark, and left to drown in its own rage. She pressed her scarred hand against the wet stone floor, feeling the vibrations of the dragon's pacing. In that brief silent moment, the broken maid and the untamable beast shared a singular tragic reality. They were both trapped in a world that only valued them for what they could provide and punished them for what they were. As she returned to her scrubbing, a quiet resolve flickered in Imagigen's eyes. The castle braced for tomorrow's spectacle, anticipating the triumph of a new rider. But Imagigen knew with a certainty that chilled her blood that the fire was far from satisfied. The ash was going to fall once again. The sun rose over the Oakhaven arena like a golden coin, casting long, dramatic shadows across the tiered seating. The stands were packed to the brim with nobility, military commanders, and wealthy merchants. The air hummed with a macabre excitement. They were here to witness the taming of a legend or, if failing that, a spectacular and gruesome execution. In the royal box, Alpha King Whitaker sat upon his throne, his posture rigid. He wore ceremonial armor, though it felt more like a cage today. Beside him stood Enrique Salas, nervously twisting a signate ring, and a few seats away lounged Lord Diego Zamora. Diego was a striking man with sharp features and a calculating smile. He exuded an aura of dangerous ambition, watching the king with eyes that missed nothing. "A beautiful day for a taming, is it not, my king?" Diego purred, swirling a goblet of wine. "Let us hope Cesar Dominguez lives up to his legendary reputation. It would be a shame for the crown to suffer yet another embarrassment." Whitaker didn't look at him. The crown endures, whether the rider survives or not. Down in the lower tiers near the heavy iron gates of the arena, Imagigen balanced a massive silver tray of wine goblets. Sylvia had ordered the scullery maids to serve the lower nobles, threatening them with severe punishment if they spilled a single drop. Imagigen's arms ached, but her attention was drawn to the center of the sands. The heavy portcullis on the far side of the arena slowly ground upward, the sound of grinding iron echoing across the silent crowd. From the darkness emerged Cesar Dominguez. He was a vision of arrogance. Clad in gleaming heat-resistant armor scaled in deep crimson. He carried a long-hooked spear and a heavy chain, meant to bind the beast. He raised his arms to the crowd, basking in their cheers as if the victory were already his. "Open the inner gates," Caesar commanded, his voice booming across the arena. The ground shuddered. The massive reinforced steel doors of the holding pit slowly parted. For a moment, there was only blackness within. Then, two massive eyes ignited in the shadows, pools of molten gold that seemed to burn with the heat of a dying sun. Then it stepped into the light. The dragon was breathtakingly terrifying. It was massive. Its scales the color of midnight obsidian, jagged and sharp like broken glass. Heavy chains, thick as a man's torso, trailed from its neck and limbs, digging into its flesh. Smoke plumed from its nostrils with every ragged breath. But it wasn't just anger that radiated from the beast. It was a profound, suffocating grief. Imagigen, standing near the serving tables, felt the air sucked from her lungs. She dropped a goblet, the silver clattering against the stone, but luckily no one noticed. All eyes were on the monster. Cesar Dominguez stepped forward, cracking a heavy whip against the sand. The crack echoed like a gunshot. "Submit," he roared, channeling his alpha aura, attempting to project dominance over the creature. Verithrax didn't flinch. The dragon simply tilted its massive head, studying the insignificant man in red armor. "I said submit." Caesar yelled again, charging forward. He threw the heavy chain, attempting to lasso the dragon's snout. The chain wrapped around the beast's jaws, and Caesar pulled with all his might, digging his boots into the sand. For a split second, the crowd held its breath. Had he done it? Had he bound the beast? Then, the dragon moved. With a casual, almost lazy flick of its massive head, the dragon snapped the heavy iron chain as if it were made of spun sugar. Caesar stumbled backward, losing his footing. The dragon advanced, not with blinding speed, but with the terrifying, deliberate pace of an apex predator. "Guards! The ballistas!" Caesar screamed, his arrogance shattering into pure terror as he scrambled backward in the dirt. From the royal box, Whitaker surged to his feet. "Hold your fire. If you shoot the beast, it will frenzy." But it was too late. The dragon opened its maw, a deep orange glow building in the back of its throat. It didn't roar. It released a concentrated, blinding torrent of liquid fire. Cesar Dominguez didn't even have time to scream. The flames consumed him entirely, melting his crimson armor and turning the sands around him into a pool of glowing glass. The heat washed over the lower tiers of the arena, causing the nobles to shriek and scramble backward. Imagigen was knocked off her feet by the blast of hot air, the tray of wine clattering to the floor, splashing red across the stones like blood. She lay on her back, staring in horror as the dragon raised its head, letting out a roar that cracked the stone pillars of the arena. It thrashed against its remaining chains, tearing at the walls, trying to break free. Panic erupted. The crowd surged toward the exits, trampling one another. In the royal box, Diego Zamora smiled a thin, cruel smile, watching the chaos unfold. "A pity," he murmured to no one in particular. Whitaker stared down at the smoking pile of ash that had been the finest rider in the South. The king felt a cold dread settle over his heart. The beast could still not be broken. It could not be ruled, and without it, his kingdom would burn just as Caesar had. Below, amidst the screaming and the smoke, Imagigen slowly pushed herself up. Her eyes met the golden gaze of the thrashing dragon. Amidst the chaos, the beast paused for a fraction of a second, locking eyes with the broken maid. In those molten eyes, Imagigen didn't see a killer. She saw a prisoner who had just executed its warden. The castle was draped in a suffocating silence that evening, the kind of quiet that follows a devastating storm. The stench of charred meat and melted iron lingered in the air, a grim reminder of the day's catastrophic failure. Whispers echoed through the halls. Whispers of the king's incompetence, of the impending rebellion, of the curse that had befallen the Stormwood line. In the scullery, the atmosphere was fraught with panic. The servants scrubbed dishes with frantic energy, desperate to appear busy and avoid the wrath of the nobility. Sylvia Chavez, however, was in a particularly foul mood, needing a target for her nervous energy. "Look at this mess," Sylvia screeched, pointing a bony finger at the shattered goblets and spilled wine that had dropped during the dragon's attack. "You clumsy, pathetic creature. Do you know how much that silver is worth? More than your wretched life." Imagigen remained silent, kneeling to pick up the shards. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of Sylvia, but from the residual adrenaline of the arena. The image of the dragon's eyes was burned into her mind. "Silence as usual," Sylvia sneered, grabbing Imagigen by the back of her dress and hauling her to her feet. "You think you can just hide behind your scars and play the victim?" "I was knocked over by the blast, madam," Imagigen said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Excuses." Sylvia struck Imagigen across the face, the slap ringing loudly in the damp kitchen. Estella and the other maids gasped, turning their faces away. "You need a lesson in discipline." The dragon handlers refused to go down to the lower pens tonight to clean the feeding troughs. "They are too afraid." "But you will do it." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Going into the lower pens, where the furious, unrestrained beast was currently recovering from the day's trauma, was basically a death sentence. "Madam Sylvia, please," Estella interjected weakly. "She'll be killed." "Then she will die serving the crown," Sylvia barked. She shoved a heavy wooden bucket of offal and water into Imagigen's chest. "Go. If I see your face before the troughs are clean, I will have the guards throw you in the dungeon." Imagigen didn't argue. She knew it was pointless. She took the bucket, her knuckles white, and turned toward the heavy iron door that led to the lower depths of the castle. The descent was a nightmare. The spiral staircase was slick with condensation and moss, lit only by flickering dying torches. The air grew hotter and heavier with every step, carrying the thick, sulphurous scent of the beast. At the bottom of the stairs lay the grand cavern that served as the dragon's prison. Massive iron bars separated the walkway from the main cavern floor. The chamber was dark except for the faint pulsing red glow emanating from the far corner. Imagigen stepped up to the bars, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She set the bucket down. The silence down here was heavy and oppressive. "Hello," she whispered. It was a foolish thing to say, but the silence demanded to be broken. A low rumbling growl vibrated through the stone floor, traveling up Imagigen's legs and into her chest. The pulsing red glow shifted, rising from the floor. A massive silhouette detached itself from the shadows. Then, it stepped into the dim light of the corridor torches. Up close, without the safety of the arena tiers, the dragon was overwhelmingly large. Its scales were chipped and broken in some places, oozing a thick glowing sap that served as blood. The heavy iron collar around its neck had rubbed the scales raw, leaving huge, angry, festering wounds. The dragon lowered its massive head until it was level with Imagigen, separated only by the thick iron bars. It let out a huff of breath, hot and smelling of ozone and ash. Imagigen stood frozen, terrified to move, terrified to even breathe. The beast raised a massive claw, the talons longer than broadswords, and slammed it against the bars. The iron groaned and Imagigen flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the fire. But the fire didn't come. Instead, she heard an unexpected sound. A soft whimpering noise that felt entirely wrong coming from a creature of such destructive power. Imagigen slowly opened her eyes. The dragon had pressed its snout against the bars, its golden eyes fixed on her. It wasn't looking at her with malice at all. It was looking at her scars. The burn marks on her neck and arm throbbed in the heat of the cavern. Slowly, as if in a trance, Imagigen lifted her scarred hand. She didn't know what compelled her to do this. Perhaps it was a death wish. She reached through the gaps in the iron bars. The dragon went perfectly still, its massive, slit pupils dilated. Imagigen's trembling fingers gently brushed the rough, heated scales of the dragon's snout, just inches from the raw bleeding skin where the collar dug in. The beast let out a long, shuddering exhale. It didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into her touch, closing its eyes. "You're hurting," Imagigen whispered, her voice breaking. Tears welled in her eyes, carving tracks down the soot on her cheeks. "They don't see it. They only see the monster. But you're just broken, like me." She stood there in the dark, a fragile scarred maid, stroking the face of the most dangerous creature in the world. She didn't try to dominate it. Instead, she offered nothing but profound, devastating empathy. And in the darkness of the pit, the ancient terror of the skies let out a soft rumbling purr, a sound that resonated deep within Imagigen's soul, forging a bond stronger than any iron chain ever could. Alpha King Whitaker could not sleep. The screams of Caesar Dominguez echoed in his mind. Seeking the cold air to clear his head, he slipped out of his chambers and descended the servant corridors toward the lower pens. Drawn to look the beast in the eye one last time before ordering its agonizing execution. But as he reached the slick stone corridor overlooking the pit, what he saw froze him in his tracks. He blinked. There, right in front of the massive iron bars, stood a delicate girl in a ragged scullery dress. And lying beside her was the great obsidian dragon, purring like a house cat. Verithrax, the same beast that had incinerated the realm's finest rider just hours ago, rested on its side, emitting a low, contented vibration. The girl had both arms extended through the gate, her hands resting gently on its wounded neck. Whitaker stepped backward, not wanting to disturb the scene in front of him, but his boot scraped against a loose stone, and the sound shattered the fragile piece instantly. Verithrax's eyes immediately snapped open, and the dragon scrambled backward, letting out a sudden, deafening roar of defensive fury. Imagigen gasped, snatching her arms back. Terrified, she spun around, dropping to her knees when the torch light hit the king's face. "My king!" Whitaker stared at the trembling maid, then at the pacing dragon. It was aggressive again, blowing smoke toward him, yet it had allowed this girl to touch it, to pet it like a tame lap dog. He saw it with his own two eyes. "Get up," Whitaker commanded. "What is your name? How did you command it?" "My name is Imagigen, your grace," she whimpered, backing away. "No magic. One simply cannot command a creature that has lost everything. You can only mourn with it." Her words struck Whitaker like a physical blow. For months they had tried to force their dominance upon a grieving god, and they had burned for it, like fools. But this broken maid had used nothing but profound empathy. Before he could ask more, the heavy iron door banged open. Heavy boots echoed down the shaft as Enrique hurried down the steps, accompanied by Lord Diego Zamora and a squad of royal guards. Inspecting the beast one last time?" Zamora asked, eyeing the agitated dragon with a smug smile. "The council has convened. For the safety of Oak Haven, the dragon must be destroyed at dawn by ballista fire. If you refuse, the council will move to have you deposed." Whitaker was cornered. He glanced back at Imagigen, shrinking into the shadows, and then at the dragon watching her intently. A desperate plan formed. "The beast will not be executed," Whitaker declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "The dragon is not mad. It has simply been rejecting unworthy riders. But alas, it has chosen its bond." Zamora scoffed loudly. "Chosen? There are no riders left to choose from. Who could this beast possibly have chosen?" Whitaker reached back into the shadows, taking Imagigen's scarred hand in his own, and gently pulled her into the torchlight. "Her," the Alpha King announced. "I have seen this for myself." The grand courtyard of Oak Haven was a cauldron of murmurs, tension, and disbelief. It was high noon, and the entire court, along with hundreds of citizens, had gathered to witness the impossible. The council had demanded a public demonstration. Lord Zamora had been furious, claiming the king had lost his mind, insisting that presenting a filthy scullery made as a dragon rider was a profound insult to the kingdom. He demanded that if the girl failed, both she and the beast would be executed immediately. Whitaker had agreed to the terms. Imagigen stood at the edge of the courtyard, her legs feeling like lead. She had been scrubbed clean, her ragged dress replaced by a simple, yet elegant riding tunic of deep forest green, bearing the crest of the Stormwood House. Yet, despite the fine clothes, she felt entirely naked. The eyes of 1,000 people were bearing down on her, dissecting her scars, judging her worth. "Wait. I want you to understand that you don't have to do this," Whitaker said softly, stepping up beside her. He looked majestic in his royal armor, but his eyes held a profound, quiet worry. "If you step away now, I can have you safely smuggled out of the city. I will deal with Zamora and the council myself." Imagigen looked up at the Alpha King. She saw the heavy burden he carried, the desperate gamble he was taking to save a creature he didn't even know, and to protect a maid he had just met. "If I run, they will kill him without a second thought," Imagigen said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And they will take your crown." "My crown is secondary to your life," Whitaker insisted, and the sincerity in his voice made Imagigen's breath hitch. No one had ever valued her life. To Sylvia, she was only labor. To the kingdom, she was invisible. To this king, she was suddenly worth a throne. "I am not running," Imagigen said, looking toward the heavy wooden gates leading to the pit. "He is waiting for me. He knows what's coming. He is waiting." A loud horn sounded, signaling the start of the trial. Diego Zamora stood on a raised platform, flanked by archers with heavy crossbows, ready to fire at the first sign of disaster. "Let the trial commence," Zamora shouted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let us see this so-called chosen rider tame the terror of the North." The heavy gates swung open. Verithrax did not have to be coaxed out. The massive obsidian dragon burst from the darkness, charging into the sunlight. The crowd shrieked, recoiling behind the barricades. The beast was furious. The light blinded it. The noise agitated it. It thrashed its massive head, letting out a roar that shook the dust from the castle walls. It reared up on its hind legs, snapping its jaws at the air, its throat glowing with deadly, suppressed fire. "Archers, hold your aim," Zamora yelled, though he looked eager to give the order to fire. "Image and wait." Whitaker grabbed her arm, his instincts screaming at him to protect her. The beast looked entirely out of control. Imagigen gently slipped out of his grasp. She didn't take a weapon. She didn't carry a chain or a whip. She simply walked out into the open courtyard. A tiny, fragile figure against the backdrop of a primordial god. The crowd fell dead silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Verithrax dropped to all fours in front of her, the impact trembling through the cobblestones. Its golden eyes locked onto the small figure approaching. The beast bared its teeth, letting out a low, warning hiss. Smoke billowed around its massive claws. Imagigen didn't stop. She didn't project dominance. She didn't try to make herself look larger. She simply walked forward, her heart open, her empathy radiating like a beacon in the cold courtyard. She reached up and pulled the collar of her tunic down slightly, fully exposing the jagged, terrible burn scars on her neck and shoulder. "I know," Imagigen said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence it carried across the stones. "I know they hurt you. I know they took your sky." The dragon froze. The glowing orange fire in the back of its throat began to dim. Zamora, seeing the hesitation, realized his plan was falling apart. "She's using some dark sorcery. The beast is preparing to strike. Archers, take them both down." "No, hold fire." Whitaker roared, drawing his massive broadsword, his alpha aura exploding outward, crushing the will of the guards around the platform. "Anyone who loses a bolt will lose their head." Imagigen didn't look back at the commotion behind her. She kept her eyes fully locked on Verithrax. She closed the final distance, stopping just inches from the beast's massive snout. She slowly reached out her scarred hand, palm up. "An offering, not a demand." "I cannot give you back what you lost," Imagigen whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "But I can promise you that you will never wear a chain again. I promise you, you're not alone." The beast let out a sound that broke the hearts of everyone watching. A deep, mournful bellow. The sound of a god crying. The dragon closed its eyes. Then, slowly, deliberately, the massive beast bowed its head. It lowered its immense body, the heavy scales scraping against the cobblestones until its belly rested on the ground. It folded its massive wings tight against its sides. And finally, the great obsidian dragon rested its snout directly in the palm of her scarred hand. The dragon had knelt. A collective gasp echoed through the courtyard. The impossible had happened. The terror of the North had submitted not to an alpha, not to a warrior, but to a broken maid with a gentle heart. Imagigen rested her forehead against the dragon's scales, weeping silently. On the platform, Diego Zamora dropped his goblet, the wine staining the wood like blood. His rebellion was over before it began. Whitaker Stormwood lowered his sword. He looked at the girl and the dragon bathed in the midday sun. He had sought a weapon to secure his throne. But standing before him was something far more powerful. It was magic forged from pain and empathy. And in that moment, the Alpha King knew he had not just found a rider for his dragon. He had found a queen for his kingdom. In the weeks that followed, the taming of Verithrax altered the fabric of Oak Haven forever. The political landscape shifted with the seismic force of a dragon in flight. Diego Zamora, his rebellion exposed and his credibility shattered, was stripped of his titles and banished to the outer marches. The council, once fractured and plotting, fell in line with a unified reverence for the king and his new miraculous rider. But the most profound change was within the castle walls. The heavy iron doors of the lower pits were torn off their hinges. Verithrax was moved to the highest Ares tower, given access to the open sky. The beast that had once terrorized the realm now spent its days soaring above the clouds, a majestic shadow protecting the kingdom. And always riding upon its back was Imagigen. The scullery maid was gone. In her place stood Lady Imagigen, the first true dragon rider in 3 generations. Yet she had not lost her gentle heart. One of her first acts was to overhaul the servant conditions in the keep. Sylvia Chavez was dismissed from her position, sent away in disgrace for her cruelties, while Estela Mendez was promoted to head of the household staff, a position she managed with fairness and pragmatic grace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant shades of gold and indigo, Imagigen stood on the grand balcony of the royal eyrie. She leaned against the stone railing, watching Verithrax sleep peacefully in his massive alcove, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythmic hum. She wore a gown of soft silk and gray, leaving her scarred arm bare. She no longer hid her scars. Instead, she wears them like a crown. They were the very reason the dragon had trusted her. They were a testament to her survival. "He seems at peace," a deep voice suddenly said from the doorway. Imagigen turned and smiled as Whitaker stepped onto the balcony. The king looked lighter than he had in months. The heavy lines of stress around his eyes had faded, replaced by a warm, steady calm. He wasn't wearing his crown or his armor, just a simple linen shirt and dark trousers. Whitaker walked over and stood beside her. He didn't look at the sleeping dragon anymore. He looked at her. He studied the way the fading sunlight caught the silver threads in her dress, the quiet strength in her posture. "The council is demanding that I take a queen soon," Whitaker said, his voice low, testing the waters. "They say a king with a stabilized realm needs an heir to secure the future." Imagigen's heart fluttered, but she kept her gaze on the horizon. Hiding the butterflies in her stomach, keeping her face neutral, she replied nonchalant. "I am sure there are many highborn ladies in the neighboring realms who would be honored, Your Grace." "I don't want a highborn lady from a neighboring realm," Whitaker said, turning her toward him to face him fully. He reached out, his large hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch sent a warm shiver down her spine. "I want a woman who understands that true power isn't about dominance or breaking others to your will. I want a woman who can look at a monster and see a wounded soul. I want a woman who walks through fire without flinching. I want you." Imagigen looked up into his eyes, her breath catching. "Whitaker, I am a maid. I have nothing to offer a king. I have no lands, no armies, just scars." "You have the only thing that matters," Whitaker whispered, stepping closer, completely closing the distance between them. He reached down and gently took her scarred hand in his, raising it to his lips and pressing a tender kiss to the mottled skin. "You have a heart brave enough to heal this kingdom. And you have my heart entirely." Tears trickled down Imagigen's face, but this time they were tears of profound joy. The Alpha King, a man who commanded armies and ruled the vast territories of Stormwood, was looking at her not as a servant, not even just as a dragon rider, but as his equal, his partner. "Will you stay by my side? Please?" Whitaker asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just as a rider, but as my queen." Imagigen looked at the sleeping dragon, then back at the king who had offered her a life she never dared to dream of. She had spent her life invisible, scrubbing the dirt from the floors of the powerful. Now, the most powerful man in the world was kneeling before her, asking her to stand with him. "I will," she whispered, a radiant smile breaking across her face. Whitaker pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest as he leaned down to capture her lips in a deep, passionate kiss. A soft, contented rumble echoed from the sleeping dragon in the alcove. The ash had settled. The fire had found its hearth. And the broken maid had finally found her home. I hope you enjoyed the dramatic tale of Whitaker, Imagigen, and Verithrax. It's incredible how sometimes the very things society views as our scars or weaknesses, like deep empathy or a painful past, can become the exact tools needed to calm the fiercest storms. Imagigen didn't need a sword to conquer the dragon. She only needed understanding. In real life, too, we often face dragons in the form of angry, hurting people or overwhelming situations. Approaching them with empathy rather than force can create miracles we never thought possible. If this story moved you or sparked your imagination, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic tales. Let's keep exploring the story realm together. Thank you for spending time with me. Until next time, be blessed and stay safe out there.